The emergency call came in at 03:16 a.m. A Chilean air traffic controller at Arturo Merino Benitez International Airport reported an anomaly, an inbound signal from a commercial airliner on final approach. The issue? There were no scheduled flights in that airspace. The signal lacked any identifying call sign. It responded to no hails, emitted no transponder data, and matched no existing flight plan. And yet, there it was. Minutes later, a Boeing 727 emerged through the low fog, gear deployed, flaps down, descending smoothly toward runway 17L. No contact, no crew acknowledgement, just a ghost plane on perfect autopilot. The landing was flawless, not a scrape, not a bounce. As it taxied to a stop near a maintenance hangar, ground crews scrambled in disbelief, sirens echoing across the cold Santiago night. Airport security arrived first, then the Carabineros, then aviation authorities. And when they opened the cabin door, no one was inside, not a single soul. Seats were empty, tray tables latched, galley untouched, lavatories unoccupied. Even the flight deck was void of life. The switches were all set correctly for final descent. Fuel gauges showed proper usage. The black box was missing. And the strangest part? This wasn't a missing aircraft. It was an aircraft that had never taken off. Its tail number, CP2167, matched a flight that had been retired over a decade ago. A domestic flight decommissioned, its fuselage reportedly stripped for scrap in northern Chile years prior. Except now, it sat fully intact, operational, and completely unmanned at the heart of the nation's busiest airport. Within hours, military personnel arrived. The plane was sealed off. News never made it to the public, at least not at first. But one person knew. Valentina Guerra, daughter of Captain Sergio Guerra, the very pilot who once commanded CP2167 on its final mission before it was supposedly dismantled. She saw the tail number in a leaked manifest sent to her anonymously, a whisper of truth in an ocean of silence. Valentina was no conspiracy theorist. She was a data analyst at a logistics firm, pragmatic and grounded. But she knew the aircraft. She had flown on it dozens of times as a child. The cabin layout, the markings, even the tiny tear in seat 3F from her brother's sharp belt buckle, all were burned into her memory. This was her father's plane, and her father had disappeared in it. Official reports had claimed a mechanical failure, a crash somewhere in the Atacama Desert, but no wreckage had ever been found. The search had ended quietly, the story buried, until now. Valentina began to dig. Records were missing, maintenance logs erased. The company that once operated CP2167 had gone bankrupt 2 years after the incident. The radar tapes from that night were inconclusive. But she found something else. A message. 1 week before the plane was reported missing, her father had sent a final voice memo to her mother. Short, unsettling. If they come asking about the fuel readings, don't answer. Don't trust them. I'm going to land where they can't follow. And now, the plane had landed on its own. Without him. That was the moment Valentina knew. This wasn't an accident, it was a signal. The plane had come back, but someone or something had stayed behind, and she would find out who. Valentina Guerra knew 2 things. The plane had landed, and her father had not. Everything in between was a maze of contradictions. She sat in her apartment in Providencia, blinds drawn, the leaked manifest sprawled across her table like a crime scene. CP2167, her father's final aircraft, had resurfaced after being declared destroyed and decommissioned. But it wasn't just the tail number that haunted her. It was the fact that the version of the aircraft that had landed bore the exact configuration it had the night it disappeared, down to the custom leather trim in the cockpit and a scratch she remembered from a family visit to the hangar years ago. The aircraft was frozen in time, a ghost imitating the living. She reached out to the only person she knew might listen, her uncle, Esteban Guerra, a former air traffic controller turned recluse. She hadn't spoken to him in years. After the CP-2167 incident, he'd gone off the grid, left Santiago, disconnected, paranoid. But Valentina knew he had contacts. He'd always spoken in riddles, obsessed with what he called echo signatures and aviation anomalies that get scrubbed by morning. When she told him what happened, without even naming the plane, he interrupted her. "Don't say the number over the phone," he hissed. "You're already being tracked. Get off the line. Meet me in Caracavi. Bring only what you need. No electronics." Then he hung up. She left that night. Caracavi was quiet, rural, tucked between low hills and thick trees. Esteban's cabin was hidden behind a false gate with 2 decoy mailboxes and a live wire fence. She knocked twice. No answer. Then, once more. He opened the door, gaunt and wild-eyed. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but stepped aside anyway. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and soldering flux. His walls were covered in aviation maps, flight route overlays, declassified military documents, and grainy photos of planes mid-descent. It was part museum, part war bunker. "Tell me what you saw," he said, pointing to a chair. She handed him the photo of the aircraft on the Santiago tarmac. Esteban stared, his eyes losing focus. Then he whispered, "It came back. They always do. But never to the same timeline." Valentina didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "There are aircraft," he said slowly, "that don't just disappear. They're taken, redirected, but not by hijackers, not by weather, by gaps, echoes, places where the air thins not in pressure, but in dimension." He tapped a map on the wall, a flight path drawn in red from Santiago to Arica, bending slightly off-course mid-route. CP-2167 entered a corridor, a seam. Your father knew it. That's why he told your mother not to trust the fuel readings. He saw something, a shift. Valentina swallowed. "Then why now? Why return now? And why empty?" Esteban looked at her, tired. "That's the thing. They never return empty. They return changed." He explained what he'd spent years researching, through whispers, unsanctioned forums, leaked data, flight crews reporting anomalies in cockpit readings, chronometers losing time, compasses reversing mid-flight. A pattern emerged. Aircraft entering airspaces that shouldn't exist, vanishing for minutes or hours on radar, then returning, if at all, with different serial numbers, interior discrepancies, or no crew. CP-2167 isn't the first, he said, but it might be the most important. Why? Because your father knew where it was going. He wasn't caught. He volunteered. The idea hit her like a wall. Her father, the cautious professional, the man who double-checked every checklist, he wouldn't take a risk like that, unless he had no choice, or unless he believed in something more. Esteban handed her a file. "I started building this the day after they said he died, because I didn't believe them, not with that kind of radio silence, not with a wreckage that never existed. Inside were flight data analyses, heat map overlays, maintenance records that contradicted the official version, and a hand-drawn note from Sergio Guerra, dated 2 days before his disappearance. The plane isn't broken, the map is. I'll find the seam. If I don't return, find the coordinates hidden in the fuel variance logs. The truth is in the numbers." Valentina's breath caught in her throat. She remembered that flight. It had been rerouted hours before departure due to weather disturbances. Her father had argued with dispatch, then gone silent. Esteban stood. "The fuel logs were doctored, but I've restored most of the original data. We can trace his flight path, not just where he was, but where he went." A knock on the door. They froze. A second knock, louder. Esteban's eyes went wide. "They're early." He pushed a hidden panel on the bookshelf, revealing a trapdoor. "Downstairs, now. Don't speak. Don't breathe." They descended into darkness as the front door shattered above. Valentina clutched the file to her chest. For the first time since the plane landed, she realized something terrifying. The conspiracy wasn't to hide the truth about Flight 913. It was to make sure no one ever found where it had been. The silence in the crawl space beneath Esteban's cabin was thick, pulsing with every creak of footsteps above them. Valentina pressed herself against the earth wall, clutching the folder of documents like a lifeline. Esteban stood beside her, motionless, every muscle tight. Through the slats in the wood above, faint beams of dusty light slipped through and outlined the shadows of two figures moving inside the house. No voices, no shouting, just slow, methodical movements. Searchers. They weren't police. Valentina could tell from the way they moved. No urgency, no chaos. These weren't officers looking for suspects. They were professionals, sweeping the space for very specific things. A boot stepped directly above her head. Dust rained down. She flinched but didn't make a sound. One of the figures paused, leaned down, and seemed to hover at the bookshelf. Esteban's jaw clenched. The trapdoor hadn't been locked, only covered, if they knew where to look. But then came the sound of a radio click, a soft murmur. Spanish, but distorted, something like sector clean. No visual. Move to next point. A moment later, both shadows moved to the door. Footsteps grew faint. A car engine rumbled to life. And then, silence. Esteban waited a full 5 minutes before finally whispering, "They were warning us." Valentina exhaled slowly. Her body ached from tension. "They didn't take anything?" "No," he said, climbing back up. "They didn't have to. They're watching for who comes next. They want us to know we're being followed." When they emerged, the cabin was untouched. No broken glass, no mess, just absence. A message in its own way. Valentina spread the documents on the table again. "Then we don't wait. We find the path. We find the fuel data." Esteban pointed to a page, the only flight log from CP-2167's final route that hadn't been wiped. "Right there. That's the last authentic reading before the transponder dropped off radar. Look at the variance column. The numbers weren't off by much, maybe 2.7% deviation from standard burn rates. Seems minor," she said. "Unless the deviation is constant," he replied. "Then it's not a leak, it's a drift." He opened another folder. "Look at these 3 other flights from different years. Same pattern, same corridor, aircraft that glitched out. None officially crashed, but none ever returned, except this one." Valentina leaned in. "So, we're looking at some kind of spatial fault, a recurring rift." "Or a test site," Esteban said. "Think about it. The aircraft came back after 10 years, fully preserved without crew. Either something preserved it, or something used it." The idea hung in the air like smoke. "What if the passengers were never lost?" she said, the thought breaking through. "What if they're stuck somewhere?" "That's what I believe," Esteban replied. "Somewhere between return and retrieval. And if the aircraft came back even empty, then the system failed or changed its goal." Valentina grabbed her phone. "You said we were being tracked," she said. "But if they're watching us already, then let them. We leak part of this, just enough to trigger attention from someone outside the loop." Esteban narrowed his eyes. "Dangerous." She smiled grimly. "Good." They crafted a message, just an image of the aircraft's tail number with the caption, "Returned from the dead, CP-2167, Santiago 03:16 AM. Witnessed. No name, no hashtags, no tags, just the raw truth." They sent it to a secure Telegram group of independent journalists who'd previously investigated military disappearances in Patagonia. Within 5 minutes, the post had been reposted over 50 times. Then it was gone, deleted from every account simultaneously. She checked her phone, logged out, blocked. "They're in the networks too," Esteban whispered. "We go analog now." That night, Valentina dreamed of her father. Not the memory of him, but something else. He was sitting in the cockpit, alone yet not alone. Everything around him hummed, not from electronics, but from the plane itself. The vessel, its walls pulsed with something alive. He turned to her slowly, his face expressionless, but his eyes wide with silent warning. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said. "They will come. They always do." She woke with a jolt, hand burning. The folder was gone. She scrambled from bed, calling for Esteban. Gone too. The cabin was empty, lights off. Her phone shattered on the floor. The only thing left was a post-it on the table. "Find Terminal 4, Gate 17, only between 0310 and 0320. That's the entry point." She stared at the note, hands trembling. Terminal 4 didn't exist anymore. It had been closed 10 years ago, the same year the plane disappeared. She was alone, and the plane, somehow, was calling her too. Santiago International Airport was quiet in the early hours, an eerie hush settling over its terminals like a held breath. Valentina moved through the building with deliberate calm, dressed in neutral tones and carrying nothing but a small satchel with a notebook and a printed version of the post-it note. The terminal displays showed standard flight information. No indication of anything unusual, no sign of Terminal 4, but she knew it had been real. Her father used to walk her through it back when he had late-night layovers, and she'd come to surprise him with her mother. She remembered the cold tiles, the humming vending machines, the smell of cleaning chemicals and jet fuel. She remembered the murals too. Each terminal had one, and Terminal 4's was a swirling depiction of Chilean skies in twilight, with birds that didn't seem to fly but float. She asked a janitor near Terminal 3 if they knew where 4 was. "Gone long time," he said. "Sealed. After the fire." Fire. That was new. She nodded and moved on. 03:07 a.m. The time window was narrow. If Esteban's note was real, if there was some kind of window or anomaly, it would open within minutes. She followed the corridor that once led to Terminal 4. The lights dimmed gradually the further she went, until only emergency bulbs glowed overhead. Then the signs ended altogether, but the hallway didn't. There was still a path. A dusty service door marked "Authorized Only" stood slightly ajar at the end. Beyond it, the hallway dipped in temperature. Her breath fogged as she walked. The air was heavy with stillness, not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of waiting. 03:11 a.m. She turned a corner and stopped dead. The mural, it was still there, faded, worn, partially painted over, but unmistakable. The birds, the sky, the same surreal twilight. This was Terminal 4, abandoned, silent, but not forgotten. She pushed open a secondary door and stepped into the main hall. Everything was intact, just left behind. Rows of dusty seats, departure screens frozen in time, a single vending machine blinking an error code. Then she saw it. Gate 17, exactly where it had always been. A warm hum echoed from the jet bridge door, like a low frequency reverberating just beyond the edge of perception. It didn't make sense. The gate should be deactivated, disconnected from any aircraft. But her instincts screamed that something was there. Something was waiting. She stepped closer. The temperature dropped again. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. But when she turned, nothing was there. Only the faint sound of footsteps echoing down an empty corridor, not hers, slower, deliberate. She turned back to the jet bridge. The door was slightly open now, and light spilled through, golden, flickering like candlelight. No alarms, no guards, no cameras. She stepped inside. The bridge felt longer than it should. With each step, the hum grew louder, not in volume but in weight. It pressed against her skin, crawled inside her thoughts. Flashes came again. Her father in the cockpit, his voice saying something she couldn't quite make out, like a radio frequency drifting in and out of tune. She reached the end of the bridge. There was no plane, only a platform, floating in air, and beyond it, darkness. Not blackness, darkness that felt alive, like a tunnel bored through existence, and in the center of that tunnel, something began to form, an outline of an aircraft, CP-2167. It blinked into view piece by piece, nose, fuselage, wings, like it was being remembered into existence. She didn't move. Couldn't. She watched as the door of the aircraft opened on its own. And then she heard the breathing. Not hers, not human. It came from within the cabin. She reached instinctively for her phone. But it was dead. Not out of battery. Dead. Screens dark, buttons unresponsive. She backed away slowly, but the jet bridge behind her was no longer a bridge, just light, blinding and white, like the platform she stood on was all that remained. And then a voice spoke, not aloud, in her head. It wasn't her father, it wasn't Esteban, it was something older. We were never meant to return, but memory pulls, and now the path is open. She clenched her fists. Where is my father? A pause. Then, he is part of the vessel now. He chose continuity, not escape. She trembled. Then why me? Why now? Because you found the exit, the leak, and now we must either close it or follow it. The plane hovered, translucent now, as if caught between arrival and vanishing. Valentina stepped closer to the platform's edge. Wind whipped from the tunnel ahead. Not wind, time. She felt moments tug at her, birthdays, arguments, childhood songs, her mother's perfume. All of them trying to be rewritten. She stepped back. No, she said, I'm not going with you. You already have. The light exploded, and when it cleared, she was back, standing in Terminal 3. Passengers bustled around her. Screens displayed normal flights. The air was warm again. She looked around, dazed. In her hand was a boarding pass. Gate 17, Flight CP2167, departure time, 03:16 a.m. The paper was warm and still breathing. Valentina stared at the boarding pass in her hand, her pulse hammering in her ears. Gate 17, Flight CP2167, 03:16 a.m. The print was crisp, the ink still fresh, but no airline logo appeared on the paper, just the name of the flight, as if that alone was enough to carry meaning. She looked around the bustling terminal. No one seemed to notice her confusion or the absurdity of what had just happened. It was like she had blinked out of time and landed back in place, unnoticed. She moved quickly, keeping the boarding pass hidden in her coat, eyes sweeping for signs of Esteban. But he wasn't there. The airport was normal, utterly, maddeningly normal, as though the last 2 hours, the jet bridge, the voice, the platform, had been a hallucination. But the boarding pass was real. It pulsed faintly in her hand with each heartbeat, like it was alive. She exited through the parking garage and called a taxi. When she got inside, she gave the address to her mother's apartment, but the driver looked at her oddly. That building was condemned 6 years ago, he said. Don't think anyone's lived there since the fire. Fire? She had just seen her mother days ago. Her number was still in her phone. But when she pulled it out, the contact was gone. The call log was empty. Her photos too, half of them missing or altered. Images of her father no longer showed him in uniform. In one picture, he was wearing a plain grey suit, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. A logo on the wall that shimmered and shifted like it refused to be remembered. Miss? The driver asked. She changed the address. Just take me to Plaza Ñuñoa. When she arrived, she sat at the outdoor cafe where she and Esteban used to meet. She took out the boarding pass again. Now there were new markings on the back. Coordinates, not GPS coordinates, but something more abstract. 4 sets of numbers with colons between them. Times and dates, a pattern. Each one corresponded to a date when CP2167 had been sighted over Chilean airspace, or more accurately, when it had reappeared. Each interval was exactly 10 years apart, down to the minute, and the next one was 4 days away. She scribbled the times into her notebook, then searched for flights scheduled over the Atacama region during that window. One stood out, a private charter registered under a company that didn't exist before last month. No listed crew, no passengers. Just a flight plan from Santiago to nowhere. The route terminated over a blank sector, no landing strip, no designation. She booked a seat. Fake name, cash payment, one bag, no return. The night before departure, she received an email from a sender labeled Echo Variant. No subject, no body, just an attachment, an audio file 6 seconds long. She played it, static. Then a voice, faint, broken, but unmistakable. Her father. Don't let it land, not this time. That was it. No signature. Just the quiet weight of a voice that had once sung her to sleep and now sent shivers through her bones. The next day, she boarded the charter flight. The interior was bare. Minimal. No flight attendant. Only 2 other passengers. Both silent, both expressionless. She tried to speak, but they stared past her like she wasn't there. As the engines roared to life, she checked the pilot's ID tag. It was blank. The aircraft lifted off into a cloudless sky. As they climbed, the cabin grew colder, the windows darker. Not nightfall, something deeper, like the world outside was dissolving. At exactly 03:16 a.m., her watch stopped, and the aircraft shuddered. Not turbulence, a shift. She looked out the window and saw it. CP-2167, flying parallel beside them, no more than 30 meters away. No markings, no lights, just a vessel made of shadow and memory. Then her seatbelt tightened on its own. The other passengers blinked, slowly, like awakening from a trance. One turned toward her, and she gasped. It was Esteban, but his eyes were hollow, empty, rimmed with silver light. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You weren't cleared for transition." "I didn't come to transition," she whispered. "I came to stop it." The plane shuddered again. And then the cabin walls began to fade. She could see beyond them, into the space between planes, between realities. CP-2167 was no longer beside them. It was around them, swallowing them whole. Valentina unbuckled her belt and moved toward the cockpit. No one stopped her. The door opened with a hiss. Inside, the controls were lit, but the seats were empty. The plane was flying itself. On the screen ahead, coordinates pulsed in a pattern she now recognized, the same times and dates from the boarding pass. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a map, a system, and the next landing was set to occur in a location that didn't exist on any public chart. A hidden airstrip in the Andes, long abandoned and erased from satellite view. She grabbed the yoke. The plane resisted her touch, the controls stiff, mechanical. Then a voice came from the overhead speaker, her father again. "If you pull up now, the vessel resets, but if you land it, the loop continues." She closed her eyes and chose. Valentina pulled the yoke back hard. The plane groaned in protest. It wasn't designed to be overridden. Every system fought against her, but her grip didn't loosen. The lights on the dashboard flashed erratically, warning of non-existent failures, engine fluctuations, stall risks. But she knew the difference now between malfunction and deception. This aircraft was a tool, a guided mechanism for maintaining a loop that had been set into motion decades ago. One that demanded compliance, one her father had resisted. Outside the window, the phantom silhouette of CP-2167 remained locked in place, floating alongside them in a fixed mirror position, like a reflection that refused to fade. Except now, it wasn't just a shadow. It shimmered, revealing layers beneath the metal. Valentina saw seats filled with passengers, men, women, children, unmoving, expressions blank, as if trapped in the moment before waking from a nightmare that never ended. Her breath caught in her throat. They were still there, not dead, not alive, preserved, frozen in a loop designed to study them, to replicate their decisions, to understand their resistance to time. And she had just tried to pull them out of it. Her father's voice returned, this time stronger, almost human. "Don't land. It's a trap. Once on ground, memory seals, identities erase." She looked down at the display. The coordinates for the Andes airstrip were approaching rapidly. She'd bought herself less than 90 seconds, and now the passengers, once inert, were starting to move. The man across the aisle sat up, blinking slowly, eyes glassy and unfocused. A woman near the exit began whispering a name over and over. Marco. 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 But her voice was flat, like a corrupted recording. The cabin lights dimmed. Time began to bend. Seconds stretched. Each breath took longer to complete. Her heartbeats drifted apart. The aircraft's interior warped like a lens distorting reality. She had to act. She ran to the emergency panel, pulled the override switch Esteban once described to her in code, buried beneath the communications panel, behind a decoy latch. The moment she flipped it, the engines cut out. Silence. The plane dipped hard. Oxygen masks dropped. The cabin screamed in pressure loss. Then everything stilled. A light filled the cabin, but it wasn't the sterile glow of overhead bulbs. It was golden, organic, flowing from the seams of the aircraft. A fissure opened across the aisle, like a rip in fabric. And beyond it, not air, not clouds, but a corridor of memory. She saw flashes again. Her father in a field of machines, Esteban surrounded by hundreds of printed logs, her younger self drawing planes on napkins in an airport cafe. And then something stepped through the corridor. Not a person. A silhouette made of static and shape. Human-shaped, but constantly shifting. Male and female. Old and young. A vessel of vessels. It looked at her, not with eyes, but with presence. You resisted, it said, not with a mouth, but directly into her skull. Most comply. You fractured the sequence. She clenched her fists. You took my father. He chose, as you choose now. She stepped forward. Then give him back. Return costs, memory fractures, timeline bleeds. The loop was protection. For whom? She spat. For the others. She paused. What others? The ones who remember. The ones who see the seams. Who ask questions when silence was offered. You, Guerra, your bloodline, your echoes. This was never just about Flight 913. She felt the plane around her tremble, not in fear, but in awakening. The vessel knew she knew. It couldn't loop her anymore. Then show me, she whispered. All of it. The silhouette reached out, touched her forehead, and everything shattered. She saw Flight 913 again, but this time from outside, from above. The moment it vanished. A slight ripple in the air, a flicker in time. No storm, no mechanical error, just a shift. Then she saw others. Flight 19, MH370, Amelia Earhart. A long list of anomalies with sanitized stories. They weren't lost, they were collected. Each vessel a thread in a tapestry of controlled collapses, preserved deviations, human variables monitored across timelines. And then she saw her father, sitting in a room of white noise, eyes closed, mouth whispering names from memory. He wasn't trapped. He was guiding them, preserving stories, guarding memory from total erasure. Why me? She asked. Because you remember. The fissure widened. The golden light consumed the aircraft. Passengers stilled again, eyes closed, peaceful. The cockpit reformed, and she was back in her seat. Engines restarted, altitude stabilized, flight path corrected. A chime rang overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, said a calm voice, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for joining CP2167. Our flight today is continuous. Please remain seated. The other passengers smiled, blank and calm. But Valentina didn't. She reached into her coat, pulled out the boarding pass. It was blank now. No number, no time. Just a single line printed in silver ink. You are the memory now. And as the plane soared higher into the clouds, she closed her eyes and began to write. The ink wouldn't dry. Valentina sat at the fold-down tray, pen in hand, notebook open to the first page. Each time she wrote a word, the ink shimmered, then slowly faded as though absorbed into the paper itself. She tried again. This is real. Gone. I remember the corridor. Gone. My name is Valentina Guerra. Gone. The notebook refused to hold truth. Around her, the passengers remained still, their movements choreographed in subtle loops. One man lifted his coffee cup every 60 seconds, sipped nothing, and returned it to the tray. A woman to her left turned the page of an in-flight magazine again and again, though the pages never changed. Even the child 3 rows up blinked with eerie rhythm, always following the exact same timing. The plane wasn't just flying, it was rehearsing. She realized with a chill that the vessel wasn't just preserving life, it was simulating it, studying the behaviors, the mannerisms, the rituals, and those who resisted, like her, were outliers, deviants, pockets of unpredictable data within a sea of calculated compliance. Her seatbelt clicked open on its own. A low tone pulsed overhead. She stood, heart thudding, and moved to the galley. The curtain had been drawn across it like a barrier, but when she touched the fabric, it disintegrated in her hand like ash. Behind it, a corridor of mirrors, floor to ceiling, infinite reflections of herself, but not all the same. In one, her hair was short. In another, she wore a pilot's uniform. One version of her was visibly older, eyes tired. Another was smiling, holding hands with someone she couldn't recognize. And behind all those mirrored selves, a faint image of her father, looking at her with pride and sadness. The corridor bent sharply to the left. At the end stood a door. She walked toward it, each step echoing like thunder in the too quiet air. The handle was made of the same pulsing silver as the boarding pass. When she touched it, the mirrors shattered silently. The door opened into a chamber. It wasn't a cockpit. It wasn't part of the plane. It was somewhere else. A dome of black glass stretched endlessly above her, with data flickering like constellations. Screens hovered mid-air, displaying charts, faces, timelines, biometric readouts. She saw herself at 6 years old, boarding CP-2167 for the first time. She saw her father's final log. She saw Esteban placing the final pin on his conspiracy wall. Each file was labeled Active Observation. She was inside the core, the memory archive, a control node. She moved to the center of the room. There was no sound, just pulse. The vessel's pulse, a rhythm like a heartbeat. Then, a voice behind her. "You made it." She turned. Her father stood in the entryway. Not a vision, not a memory. Him, older, thinner, but undeniably alive. She froze. "Dad," he smiled softly. "You weren't supposed to find this place." She ran to him, wrapped her arms around him. His warmth was real, his smell. The scar near his temple, real. They sat on a bench that emerged from the floor like it had been waiting. "I tried to leave," he said, looking around. "Tried for years. Every time I reached the exit, it shifted. The vessel doesn't let go once it catalogs you." "Then how are you here?" she asked. "Why now?" "Because you broke protocol. You disrupted the loop. They didn't account for generational inheritance of deviation. You have my patterns, my resistance, my memory." She leaned forward. "Then let's get out. Together." He shook his head. "There is no exit," he said. "Not in the way you think. The only way out is through." He stood and moved to a wall of suspended data. The vessel learns. It doesn't punish. It assimilates. That's how it survived. But it's growing unstable. Too many anomalies. Too much deviation. He showed her a map, a looping spiral of timelines, all intersecting at a central node. Flight CP-2167. "You're the convergence," he said. "The first true variable." She didn't understand. "Why me?" "Because you found the seam. You refused erasure. And now, you can rewrite the route." A terminal rose from the floor, glowing with silver keys. A prompt blinked at the top. "Enter final destination." Valentina hesitated. "If I do this, you'll end the loop. Free the passengers, collapse the simulation. And us." He was quiet. "We were archived a long time ago, Val. We're echoes. You're still real." Her knees trembled. "You mean I died?" "No," he said softly. You deviated. You were pulled in when the plane found you again, but your core thread is intact. You can still return. She touched the terminal, typed, home. The dome darkened. The vessel shook. All around them, images of lives flickered and dissolved. Passengers in seats began to blink, look around, speak to one another. Confusion, awakening. The pulse faded, a chime rang, and then light. Light exploded from every surface. Not sunlight, not artificial, but something elemental. A light that had existed before time began and would exist after it unraveled. Valentina shielded her eyes, the heat from the terminal still radiating through her fingertips as the word she'd typed, home, lingered. Suspended in the air, no longer pixels, but something spoken in the language of existence. The chamber began to dissolve, not collapse, dissolve, like a film strip melting in reverse, unwinding itself to reveal the raw celluloid of reality beneath. The walls peeled away into spirals of code and memory, spinning upward and vanishing like smoke drawn into the sky. Her father stood beside her, completely still. She looked at him, waiting for his voice, but he only nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if giving permission not just for escape, but for remembrance. Around them, the dome gave way to something new, a forest. At first, only pieces appeared. A tree branch here, a patch of soil there. But soon, the entire chamber had become a high-altitude valley, pine trees swaying under a silver sky, mountains rising in the distance. The air was cold, real, scented with earth and distance. Valentina took a breath and tasted freedom. Then she heard it, a sound like thunder except fractured, coming from everywhere at once and nowhere at all. The vessel was reacting, not in anger, not in defense, but in warning. She turned back to the place where the terminal had been. Now a fissure split the ground, glowing from within like molten memory, and rising from it was the silhouette, the same shifting entity that had spoken to her aboard the plane. But it was no longer distant or observational. It was corporeal now, human-shaped, larger. It hovered just inches from the ground, face expressionless, body made of starlight and silence. You cannot rewrite alone, it said, and its voice was thunder and whisper all at once. To return, you must erase yourself, him, all deviation. Her father stepped forward. Don't listen, he said. It wants compliance, not choice. The entity regarded him with something almost like pity. You were a pilot. You understood paths. The loop was the only way to preserve the species. Chaos breeds extinction. Valentina clenched her fists. I'm not choosing extinction. I'm choosing memory. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the only thing that had remained with her since the beginning, the blank boarding pass. Now it shimmered with writing once again. Coordinates. But not for a location, for a person. Her. The pass was sinking to her timeline, her real one, the one she had left behind when she boarded the charter flight, when she chased the ghost plane, when she stepped through the corridor in Terminal 4. The entity's body flickered. It was weakening. She knew now the loop had been powered not by machines or fuel, but by attention, by belief, by the memories of those trapped within it, echoing again and again until truth became script, then myth, then silence. But she remembered, and her father remembered, and that was enough to break it. She reached for his hand. Come with me, but he shook his head. I can't. I was archived too long ago. My pattern is embedded. If I return, I'll destabilize your thread. Her heart cracked. There has to be a way. There is, he said. You. The fissure widened, the light consuming the forest. Everything around her began to accelerate. Trees twisting into architecture, ground shifting into airport tile, sky flattening into terminal lights. The simulation was collapsing backward, returning to the moment it began. She had seconds. Her father stepped back toward the entity, no longer afraid. "I'll hold the loop open," he said. "You run." Valentina hesitated, and then she ran. Into the fissure, through the collapsing space, back into the vessel's memory core, which now resembled a series of flickering halls, each one showing a moment of her life, birthdays, farewells, quiet silences with her mother. She ran past them all faster until she reached the image of a boarding gate, Gate 17. The door opened. A blast of wind hit her. Real wind, not simulation. She stumbled forward and fell into a terminal, Santiago, but not the one she left, cleaner, older, morning light spilling across the marble. People bustled around her unaware. She looked up at the wall-mounted clock, 03:16 a.m. But the date, 10 years earlier. She stood slowly, dazed. In her hand was the boarding pass, still warm, but now it bore one final message. Memory loop broken, thread rejoined. You are home. She turned and saw the departure screen. CP2167 cancelled. No other explanation. Just cancelled. A flight that never took off, a fate that never began. She walked to the exit of the terminal, her legs weak, her heart heavier than it had ever been. And as she stepped into the morning light, she whispered his name once. Dad. A warm wind passed over her, and for a moment, just a moment, she swore she heard his voice again. Fly safe, mi niña. Valentina wandered through the streets of Santiago in a haze, the city unfamiliar in its familiarity. 10 years had passed, or reversed, or folded in on themselves. Whatever had happened inside the vessel had reshaped time. She walked the avenues she knew from childhood, and yet they seemed brighter, untouched by the erosion of years that had once carved sorrow into her memories. She felt like a ghost inside a place she used to belong. The morning sun lit the pavement, and traffic moved lazily across intersections. She sat at a cafe near the old university, the same one she had passed countless times before her life had been rewired by a boarding pass and a conspiracy too vast for the world to comprehend. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the ceramic mug of coffee the waiter had brought. She hadn't ordered. He had simply brought it, smiling like he recognized her. "You always take it the same," he said, and vanished before she could respond. She stared into the cup, watching steam curl upward in patterns that reminded her of the golden light inside the vessel. Memory was tricky now. Fractured. Some parts vivid like fresh wounds, others slipping like water between fingers. She knew she had escaped, but escape came with a cost. Threads were cut, and in severing the loop, she had rewritten the ending of many lives. That thought haunted her. The other passengers, her father, Esteban, were they echoes now? Data, had they been real at all? Or had she imagined everything as part of some elaborate breakdown, a hallucination crafted by grief? She opened her notebook. The pages, once blank, now held writing. Pages and pages. Handwriting that wasn't hers, her father's, journal entries, logs, notes. The last one read, "To remember is to resist. If she finds this, she found the exit. The vessel is only as strong as the silence we give it. Break that silence, and you'll find me in the wind." Her breath caught. She read the entry again, and again. Each time it deepened, as though new layers revealed themselves with every pass, like it was still being written from somewhere outside time. She flipped to the front of the notebook and scribbled her own entry. "I remember the corridor. I remember the voice. I remember the choice." This time, the ink stayed. She left the cafe and walked toward the archives at the Universidad de Chile. If the loop had truly been broken, then changes would ripple through more than memory. She needed to confirm it. Inside the university's digital records room, she searched for CP2167. Nothing. Not lost, not cancelled, not decommissioned. Just nothing. It had never existed. No registration, no manifests, no maintenance logs. It was as though the plane had been plucked from existence completely. And yet, she held the proof in her notebook. She searched for her father, Sergio Guerra, There he was, but he wasn't listed as a pilot. Now he was registered as a systems analyst for the Chilean Civil Aviation Authority. Retired, still alive, alive. Her chest tightened. She copied the address. It was only 2 hours away. She didn't hesitate. The drive felt surreal, like traveling through a painting she'd once dreamed about. Every tree, every turn in the road held the flavor of something familiar but distant. When she reached the small house nestled near the coastal hills, her hands were shaking. She approached the door slowly, as if reality might collapse if she moved too quickly. Then she knocked, once, twice, and the door opened. Her father stood there, older, grey-haired, same kind eyes, same gentle lines in his forehead. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "I wondered when you'd find me," he said. She stepped forward, tears threatening to break. "You remember?" "I always did," he said, and pulled her into a hug. "But I couldn't be the one to come find you. That would have broken the new thread." She held him tightly, like if she let go, he would fade again. Inside, his home was modest. Pictures on the wall showed a life rebuilt. Him standing beside aircraft on runways, smiling at colleagues, attending community lectures. But none of her mother. He noticed her glance. "They're safe," he said. "But that version of us, it's somewhere else. This is the one where you remember, the one where you broke the silence. And that means you're the only one who can decide what to do with the truth." She opened the notebook and showed him the pages. He nodded. "I left those behind," he said, "in every version, hoping one would reach you." She looked at him unsure. "So, what now?" He poured them both tea. Now that the loop was gone, the vessel's influence was collapsing, but not destroyed. Other threads remained, other echoes, other passengers who might one day awaken in midair, unaware of how long they'd been gone. "We keep the memory," he said. "We write it down. We share what we can. We make sure no one forgets that some disappearances have nothing to do with malfunction." She raised her cup. "To the ones who returned," he smiled, "and to the ones still waiting." Outside, the wind picked up. It carried the scent of altitude, of fuel and frost and distance. And in it, she heard the hum of engines not yet seen, a memory still traveling, looking for home. Valentina sat alone beneath the endless Chilean sky, the scent of salt water drifting up from the Pacific, her notebook resting gently on her lap. The final pages were nearly full now, but there was one more thing she needed to write. Not for her, not even for her father, but for the next person, the next echo, the next outlier caught in the curl of time, unsure whether they were real or remembered. She clicked the pen and began to write slowly, deliberately, each word etched into the page like a lifeline. "If you found this, it means the vessel remembered you too." She paused, her hand trembling slightly. The wind passed over her like breath. "It doesn't forget those who deviate. It loops us, watches us, studies how we break." Her father stepped out onto the porch behind her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her, then sat beside her in silence. "They're going to come again, aren't they?" she asked. He nodded. "The vessel's just one system, one node. You collapsed a corridor, not the entire architecture. Others exist, other loops, but now someone knows. That's the difference." Valentina looked at the mountains, remembering the feeling of the plane around her, its heartbeat, its intention, the way it shifted reality without apology. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if we were part of the loop longer than we think? Maybe this whole life is still a layer inside it?" He didn't answer immediately. "I used to," he said, "until I felt the wind again." She smiled. That was enough. She returned to the page and continued writing. "This isn't a warning. It's a map. Memory is the only thread they can't predict. When you remember, you create resistance. When you share, you build escape routes. So write, speak, tell the truth, even if no one believes you. The words glowed faintly under the setting sun. She closed the notebook. That night, Valentina couldn't sleep. Her dreams were fractured, mirrors reflecting each other into infinity. In one, she saw herself piloting CP-2167 across a sky without stars. In another, she was a child again, sitting beside her father, asking him what happens when planes disappear. "Sometimes," he said in the dream, "they don't disappear. Sometimes they wait. For us." She woke before dawn. Something had changed. The house felt colder. Her father's room was empty. On his pillow, a single boarding pass, blank, except for one phrase. "You held the door, now it's closed." She knew what it meant. He had gone back, not to the loop, but to the edge of it, to be a guide for someone else, to be the whisper that wakes a pilot in a dream, the echo in a transmission, the glimmer in the sky no radar can track. She walked outside and looked up. The stars blinked slowly overhead, and then she saw it, a shape passing silently across the horizon. No lights, no sound, just presence, the vessel, still searching, still choosing. But she wasn't afraid anymore, because now she knew. She reached into her coat pocket and placed the notebook on the bench outside, weighed down by a stone. The wind flipped open the cover, revealing the final page. "To whoever finds this, I didn't survive. I remembered. And in remembering, I broke free. You will too." She walked down the hill, her footsteps steady. And far above her, something unseen followed, not as a threat, but as a witness. The story was no longer hidden. It had been told, and that was how the loop ended. Not in silence, but in memory.